Welcome to Drucker on the Dial, a show on management and leadership where timely issues meet timeless principles. Produced by the Drucker Institute at Claremont Graduate University. I'm your host, Phalana Tiller. Today on Drucker on the Dial, we're going to talk with two guests who've thought deeply about the practice of management across a wide variety of fields. First, we'll hear from Gail McGovern, President and CEO of the American Red Cross. Before taking her post at the Red Cross, where she has faced a host of both challenges and opportunities, McGovern was a professor of marketing at Harvard and an executive at AT&T and Fidelity Investments. She thus brings a wealth of cross-sector experience to the nation's leading disaster relief organization. Our second guest today will be Scott Keller, a director at the consulting giant McKinsey & Company. He's the co-author of the new book, Beyond Performance: How Great Organizations Build Ultimate Competitive Advantage, which is based on a mammoth study of how a range of businesses, from banks to retailers to coal mines, successfully sustain themselves over time. First up on Drucker on the Dial today is Gail McGovern, who has led the Red Cross since June 2008. She stepped into the job at a time when the organization was beset by severe financial stress and a scandal involving her predecessor, who left the Red Cross after an affair with a subordinate. Since then, McGovern has turned things around. She now manages an annual budget of more than $3 billion and is at the top of an institution with over 30,000 employees spread out across over 700 chapters. Her private sector experience at places such as AT&T and Fidelity Investments has surely been invaluable. But at the same time, managing a nonprofit organization has certain unique aspects. Decades ago, Peter Drucker remarked, "Management was a very bad word in nonprofit organizations. Management meant business, and the one thing a nonprofit was not was business." But today, Drucker added, nonprofits know that because they don't have a bottom line, they have to manage better than for-profit businesses. Welcome to Drucker on the Dial. Gail, I'm interested to talk to you a little bit about some of your career choices and the path that led you now to be president and CEO of the American Red Cross. Peter Drucker spoke often about this concept of repotting yourself. He thought that change, whether big or small, is essential in order to stimulate yourself. I'm interested to know how you got to where you are, and you've had so much experience in the private sector and in academia and now in nonprofit. Have you made your career decisions consciously out of a desire to repot yourself, or have you just kind of gone where the interest and opportunity has led you?
I would describe it as a combination of both. I don't think I was deliberately attempting to repot myself, but when I give people starting out in their career paths advice, I always tell them that one of the things that they can do is to learn to be uncomfortable. Because I truly believe that if you're not uncomfortable, that you're not learning. Mm-hmm. So I had a tendency to raise my hand and try to volunteer for the more challenging jobs, not necessarily because of career advancement, but just because it satisfied a deep intellectual curiosity and the desire to learn new things. And I like feeling uncomfortable because when I first get that feeling before I've mastered the next thing, I know I'm learning. Mm-hmm. I love not knowing what people are talking about. I love asking the dumb questions. So I suppose that is a form of repotting. And I've done it throughout my career, and it's exhilarating. And the more you do it, the more you can rely on other experiences, do a little pattern recognition in the new environment you find yourself in, and lead accordingly.
Mm-hmm. And I noticed once that in an interview you described the specific decision to move to the American Red Cross as one that you made because it was the challenges that attracted you. And you said that if you thought it was a well-oiled machine, they wouldn't need you.
That's very true. I had to move my family, and I didn't want to do that if there wasn't a real purpose for doing so. And the American Red Cross is a national treasure, and it definitely posed a leadership challenge. And I wanted to have the opportunity to give back and at the same time meet a new challenge. Mm-hmm. So I do feel like if it was a well-oiled machine, that the challenge wouldn't be there, and nor would I be needed.
Right. Clearly there were some challenges that you probably anticipated, and then certainly there's been many that were unforeseen. How's that been for you?
First of all, there were surprises, but I have to say most of them were quite pleasant. The organization is just filled with talent, and these are smart people that also are driven by our mission. And when I first arrived, we had a $209 million operating deficit. We closed our books 7 days after I showed up, and because every employee and every volunteer worked to help us close it, within 2 years we were able to actually have a modest surplus. And the financial challenge was enormous, and then you throw in there, the whimsy of Mother Nature, and those are always challenges as well. Mm-hmm. But I've come to appreciate the fact that Red Crossers basically can do anything if they have an understanding of how it helps them fulfill our mission, and if they think it's a good use of our donors' dollars. So that was a pleasant surprise. And in terms of how it's going, we still have our challenges. It's a tough economy, and everything we do is because of the generosity of our donors. Mm-hmm. But having said that, the generosity of the American public never ceases to amaze me. I mean, people just step up, and people in our country innately want to help others. And when they see that someone is in need, there's kind of a feeling of there, but for the grace of God go I, and people want to get engaged. Mm-hmm. So the challenges are there, but I feel that they're all surmountable. We're also an organization that's 130 years old, so we have to learn to be better at embracing change. Mm-hmm. But once again, when you tell the employees and volunteers the reason for the change and how it enhances the mission, they're fairly easy to galvanize around the change as long as they understand how it helps others.
There clearly had been a great deal of change in terms of the leadership before you arrived. I believe the number is something like there were 7 CEOs in the 7 years before you arrived. And I mean, that must have been quite a challenge for you just in terms of establishing trust right away with your staff and with the volunteers and just the organization in general. What were some of those kind of initial goals and strategies that you had to employ right away as a leader to engender that trust?
Well, when I first arrived, the first thing that I did was a lot of listening. And I talked to employees, I talked to the executives in our chapters, I talked to volunteers, I talked to board members, both local board members and our own board members, and I asked them, what are the obstacles and what do we need to focus on to make sure that we right the ship? And the same themes kept coming out, regardless of which group or which constituency I spoke with. And in those listening tours, I just made a list and then basically started having town meetings. Did I get this right? Does it make sense? And I think just the act of listening was trust building. And the other thing I will say is I inherited a remarkable leadership team. Mm-hmm. They'd been through a lot, but it was a remarkable group of people. I recruited some additional folks because there were openings and areas that I thought needed further attention, but the original group still sits around my leadership table today, and they also care deeply about the mission, and they're smart, and they know the right thing to do. And I think that probably also helped in the trust area, because I had no desire to throw the place upside down. I mean, there's so many things that were going right, mm-hmm. and we just needed to focus on some of the challenges and make sure that we made it easier for the people here to focus on the mission.
Mm-hmm. There was a time when Peter Drucker was asked about the differences between nonprofit institutions and businesses. And he wrote that businesses usually define performance too narrowly, and they define that as the financial bottom line. But he went on to say that in a nonprofit organization, there is no such bottom line. What do you make of that idea about the financial bottom line is not the bottom line in nonprofit institutions?
I think the sentiment is correct. Having said that, you still have to be mindful of your budget, because you have a fiduciary responsibility to your donors to make sure that you're cost conscious, that you're effective, that you're efficient, that there's no waste. So there, I relied very much on my for-profit experience because there is, a bit of a bottom line in that instead of shareholders, you have donors that you want to be accountable for. And we have the most remarkable donors. I mean, one of the most incredible half hours I've ever spent here at the Red Cross was right after the earthquake struck Haiti. Within that same 30-minute period, I got a call from the chief marketing officer of a Fortune 10 company that gave us $1 million gift. And then I got a piece of mail from a young boy that said this crumpled up dollar bill was from the Tooth Fairy. Could I give it to the people of Haiti? And I have to tell you, Phalana, that when I make decisions and when my team makes decisions, I just imagine those two individuals in the room with me. Mm-hmm. And I want them to be proud of how we spend the money. So there is that element to the bottom line. But what's different in a nonprofit is the way you attract people, the way you retain people, the way you motivate people is about giving back. It's about helping people that are vulnerable. And that has a set of psychic rewards that transcend a lot of what's been written about employee satisfaction or customer satisfaction. Mm-hmm. So from that perspective, it's completely different than for-profit, and Peter Drucker's exactly right. I mean, for the people that work here, the bottom line is, did I help people today?
How about the idea of performance and measuring performance? I mean, clearly, when you're talking about did I help people today, there's sort of a more qualitative nature to some of those results and some of those answers about performance. And certainly you have your more quantitative measures when you're talking about the bottom line with regard to the donors and making sure that you're handling the fiduciary responsibilities. But how does the idea of measuring results and assessing performance play into your leadership and the management of the organization? Is that something that you're attentive to and that you talk about with your staff, with your organization?
It's an excellent question, and you actually have to be very attentive to that piece as well, because the chief marketing officer is not going to give you $1 million gift and say, here it is, spend it as you like, and we trust you if you're not transparent. And transparency brings with it a lot of metrics. So, for example, on a disaster, we keep track of how many meals and snacks we served. We keep track of how many volunteers we needed to move into the disaster area to open up shelters and to stand up sleeping capabilities and childcare capabilities. I mean, a lot of it is a material logistics problem. We have to make sure we have enough supplies pre-positioned in our warehouse and that we know how to get the supplies from here to there. So a lot of it is, if you will, a kind of a left brain tracking to make sure that all of the supplies, the people, the mental health counselors, that they're in the area where disaster strikes. And in some ways, we have a national operations center. In some ways, it's reminiscent of the center that I used to see at AT&T when there would be an outage in the telephone system. So there is a lot of metrics, measurements, quantitative inspection to make sure that you're doing it right. And then there are the more qualitative experiences. So when I go to a disaster area, I talk to the residents in our shelters and just make sure we're doing everything we possibly can. Mm-hmm. I keep track of what the media is saying about us because, if we do a good job, it shows in the media. So there are non-quantitative parts of it as well, for sure. But at the end of the day, and then, of course, we supply half the nation with its blood supply, and that is a big, almost just-in-time inventory problem. Right. We have to monitor if the supply is right. We don't want to take the precious gift of somebody's blood donation and not have a hospital that needs it. Right. And by the same token, we've got to make sure that we're putting out a request if we're short in some sort of blood type. So there's a lot to be measured if you do this well. And there's a lot of psychic gratification that at the end results from it as well, too.
You mentioned earlier about the responsibility around attracting staffers, volunteers, and donors and keeping those people. And I'm interested to know perhaps how your work, your background as a professor of marketing, your work in the world of marketing, how that has impacted how you look at the different facets of what you need to do as an organization.
So one of the many, many things that attracted me to the Red Cross in the first place is just its brand. You look at the emblem, you look at the logo, and it just instills a feeling of hope, comfort. And I thought, wow, they're with the exception of Coca-Cola, it is the most recognized emblem in the whole world of global branding. So, and it's got such a resonance with it. And the first question that I ask myself is it modern enough? Is it relevant to youth? And our marketing group and our public affairs group have done a remarkable job of using social media to make the brand more relevant. So from that perspective, our outreach is no longer the classic advertising and then drop direct mail pieces and ask people to mail in checks. A classic example of ways that we reached donors was our text program. After the earthquake in Haiti, we got $32 million of donations, $10 at a time. Wow. And these were young people that just reached for their cell phones and texted Red Cross to 90999. And what we saw was the power of many, 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 many people making a single donation. And so the marketing challenge of keeping that going is one that's fascinating, and it showed us that there was just a lot of pent-up affection that we could tap into. And then for larger donors, it's all about being transparent and making them feel that their dollars are being put to good use and that we can track it and we can be effective with it. And so the reaching constituents that way has been an interesting challenge, but an unbelievable blessing because the brand is so powerful. And, they say that 1 in 5 people have a Red Cross story in our country. And when I walk around with my Red Cross pin on, it feels to me like it's even more than that. People will stop me and say, you guys taught me how to swim, or I had lifeguard training from you, or I took a CPR course, or, some of them are heartfelt stories like, when I was younger, my house burnt down and you put me in a hotel. So the stories are endless, and capturing those and putting them up in front of our donors it's gratifying, it's interesting from a marketing perspective, and I still think there's untapped potential to get people engaged to volunteer time or to make a financial donation, or the ultimate gift, to open up their veins and actually share their blood with somebody in need.
I put out a call for questions earlier today using some of our social media here, and the instant response wasn't a question. Actually, it was someone who serves in the armed forces who specifically wanted me to thank you and thank the American Red Cross for all the support that you give to people who serve.
One of my favorite prongs of our mission, and probably one that's the least known. I have a stepson who is in the Air Force, and he has served 2 tours of duty in Iraq. And when I joined the Red Cross, he told me some of the things that we do for the military. We have volunteers, believe it or not, in theater everywhere our soldiers are.
Oh, wow.
So we have volunteers in Afghanistan. There were volunteers in Iraq when we were in Iraq, and they set up cyber cafes and Skype connections. And I saw a clip of a man teaching his teenage son how to shave for the first time at one of our cyber cafes. It really is a beautiful, heartwarming part of our mission. And if you talk to anyone that served in the military, they probably can tell you a Red Cross story.
I'm so enjoying speaking with you, but I know I don't want to keep you too long, and I'm just going to ask you one last question.
Sure.
Hopefully. But I'm interested to know, from where you sit there at the helm, what are some of the challenges around creating cohesion with all of these tentacles, all these arms? 700 chapters, I think it is, just here in this country, and clearly now you've told me about volunteers who are with our armed forces around the world. What are some of the challenges that arise from having so much of the organization's activity and so much of its power really spread out and decentralized away from here at the helm? That must be just an intense idea to try to manage.
It's one of the things that drew me to the Red Cross. I'm one of these people that have always worked in big institutions, and oddly enough, I love big. I love complicated. I even love bureaucratic. There's an expression about getting the elephant to dance. I love trying to get the elephant to dance. And the way I have found is the easiest way to do it. I mean, there are two secrets to this, I believe, is first of all, staff great people, because you cannot do all of this yourself. So you staff great people that are aligned around the mission, that have good chemistry with each other, and yet have diversity of thought. And you sort of let them go with the part of the communications vehicle, and the other is just communicate. Too often I have seen leaders that think, well, I just laid out the strategy, now they all get it. I've learned this from marketing. I mean, you have to run a commercial 3 times, and they're only 30 seconds long for people to even know who the sponsor is. We can't get our head around complicated messages the first time we hear it, the second time we hear it, the third time we hear it. So I love doing town meetings. I love doing recordings of video where people can see the conversation about the strategic plan that you might have laid out. I love doing conference calls, and you can't do enough of this, particularly when people are far-flung all around the country. And the part of it I do face-to-face, because I always learn so much. Sometimes it sounds good in the ivory tower, and then you go out there and you think, wow, this isn't working the way I thought. So I try to get out in the field a lot, and I've learned more from the Red Crossers that touch our donors and motivate our volunteers and help people in need and draw blood. I've learned more from them, my guess is, and they learn from me. So it's definitely a two-way street of communicating that has to go on almost as a way of life for a leader of a large institution.
I read once an interview where you mentioned generating and drawing ideas from different Red Crossers to try to find out about ways to help the Red Cross prosper into the future. And you did, I guess, a series of surveys, I guess, in person and otherwise. And you got to a point where you thought, man, these ideas are so brilliant, we ought to start a futurist think tank composed of volunteers. Are you still thinking about that?
Well, we definitely listened to our volunteers, and we started creating a system of best practices, almost like a wiki best practice. Now we kind of need a wiki police, because there's so many ideas floating around that we've got to organize them a little bit better. But I will say that after any meeting with a group of employees, I always give them my email address, and I say, if you have a comment, question, concern, or a bright idea, get it to me. And the leadership team here has course corrected on multiple occasions after getting input from the field. Before we launch something, we will bring in a group of 50, 60, 70 chapter execs to just road test it, and we try to change up the group that comes in so they all get to be part of it. It makes a big difference, and it really enhances the possibility of what you're doing. It makes it easier because you create missionaries along the way that want to spread the word. So it's a great way to try to manage the change management.
I'm so fascinated with you and your work and how you get it all done, but I'm going to have to just let you go because there's only so much time. Thank you so much for being available to Drucker on the Dial. We really, really appreciate you being here with us and making time.
It was absolutely my pleasure, Phalana. In fact, it's a subject I love, and it was great having an opportunity to talk to you about it.
Thank you again. Take good care.
And now, Rick Wartzman, the Drucker Institute's executive director, with his biweekly column, The Drucker Difference.
Although Peter Drucker was a self-described workaholic, he did take time off each summer to hike amid the peaks of Colorado, reflect on the previous year's successes and failures, and of course, read. As you head to the beach or the mountains with your own stack of books, or your Kindle, Nook, or iPad, keep in mind These 5 classics about management and leadership that Drucker himself loved. All appeared before his own landmark, The Practice of Management, was published in 1954. Every one of these books, Drucker noted, laid firm and lasting foundations. The oldest book on Drucker's list is The Principles of Scientific Management by Frederick Winslow Taylor. Although it has become fashionable to disparage Taylor and his methods for spurring industrial efficiency, Drucker never wavered in his admiration for the mechanical engineer or his ideas. Indeed, Drucker asserted that scientific management may well be the greatest contribution America has made to Western thought since the Federalist Papers. And he believed that Taylor's concepts weren't just instrumental for raising the productivity of those in factories. They're crucial as well, Drucker said, to learn how to make knowledge work productive. It is also worth pointing out, in an age when many top executives have enjoyed skyrocketing pay packages while their employees' incomes have stagnated, that Taylor urged a more equitable structure. The principal object of management, he declared at the start of the Principles of Scientific Management, published in 1911, should be to secure the maximum prosperity for the employer coupled with the maximum prosperity for each employee. Book number 2 is Industrial and General Administration by Henri Fayol. Originally published in 1916, Fayol's writings reflect the mind not only of a sage theorist, but that of an able practitioner. For many years, he ran a French mining company with about 1,000 employees. Fayol's contributions include laying out a fundamental framework for administration, forecasting, planning, organizing, coordinating, commanding, and controlling. Drucker said that although Fayol's language is outdated, his insights into the work of management and its organization are still fresh and original. In fact, many businesses would do well to study Fayol's notions of generating esprit de corps and getting the most out of employees up and down the organization. Every intermediate link in the chain, Fayol wrote, can and must be a source of energy and ideas. There is in each of these links, or men, a power of initiative which, if properly used, can considerably extend a manager's range of activity. Next up, The Human Problems of an Industrial Civilization by Elton Mayo. Decades before today's management consultants began speaking of the need to engage all employees and ensure that everyone across the enterprise is aligned around a common set of big-picture goals, Mayo called for the same basic approach in this 1933 book. It is not enough to have an enlightened company policy, a carefully devised and blueprinted plan, Mayo wrote. To stop at this point has much the same effect as administering medicine to a recalcitrant patient. It may be good for him, but he is not persuaded. This is the essential nature of the human. With all the will in the world to cooperate, he finds it difficult to persist in action for an end he cannot dimly see. Although Drucker praised Mayo's book, the two men got into it during an address that Mayo delivered at Harvard Business School in 1947. Drucker questioned Mayo's philosophy, and Mayo thumbed his nose literally at Drucker. The two quickly apologized to each other. The 4th book on the list is The Functions of the Executive by Chester I. Barnard. We all know, Drucker wrote in a 2004 Harvard Business Review piece, thanks to Chester Barnard's 1938 classic The Functions of the Executive, that organizations are held together by information rather than ownership or command. Still, far too many executives behave as if information and its flow were the job of the information specialist, for example, the accountant. As a result, they get an enormous amount of data they do not need and cannot use, but little of the information they do need. For his part, Barnard, who was president of the New Jersey Bell Telephone Company, put it this way: all communication relates to the formulation of purpose and the transmission of coordinating prescriptions for action, and so rests upon the ability to communicate with those willing to cooperate. Finally, there is Dynamic Administration by Mary Parker Follett. This collection of speeches and articles on management was published in 1941. Yet Drucker didn't discover Follett for another 10 years. It was a true revelation. Follett had been the brightest star in the management firmament, Drucker said, and to change the metaphor, she had struck every single chord in what now constitutes the management symphony. Among her seminal ideas, that conflict must be made to work for us by integrating clashing perspectives into a new and different answer. She also held that effective management was vital for all organizations, not just business. Follett's true importance lies in her vision, Drucker wrote. She saw the society of organizations, and she saw management as its generic function and specific organ well before either really existed. Happy summer to all, and happy reading.
A version of that essay first appeared in The Drucker Difference, a bi-weekly column for Bloomberg Businessweek.com. Drucker on the Dial is brought to you by the Drucker Management Path. The Drucker Management Path is the only management training program based on Peter Drucker's timeless teachings. What makes the Drucker Management Path special is the way it imparts Drucker's principles. There are no lectures. Rather, in each Drucker Management Path workshop, Managing Oneself, Managing My Team, and Managing for Opportunity, participants drive the learning themselves. They use the Drucker Institute's unique learning design to immediately apply Drucker's teachings to their own management challenges. For more about the Drucker Management Path, please visit druckerpath.com. Our next guest today is Scott Keller, a director in McKinsey & Company's Southern California office. His new book, Beyond Performance, written along with his colleague Colin Price in McKinsey's London office, focuses on what they call organizational health. Health, they say, is distinguished from financial and operational performance, which can be measured through net operating profit, return on capital, returns to shareholders, and other such metrics. By contrast, health is achieved when an organization creates the capacity to learn and keep changing over time. It tends to involve the people-oriented aspects of leading an organization rather than managing by the numbers. Peter Drucker, who taught that even the most successful processes, policies, and products in an organization eventually become obsolete, was a big believer in the kind of continuous improvement that Keller and Price tout. Continuous improvements in any area eventually transform the operation, Drucker wrote. They lead to product innovation. They lead to service innovation. They lead to new processes. They lead to new businesses. Eventually, continuous improvements lead to fundamental change. Welcome to Drucker on the Dial, Scott. So, Scott, I understand that you draw a real distinction between financial performance and long-term health in an organization. Can you tell us more about the big finding of your study? What is the big idea?
So the big idea in the work is that a company that focuses on performance tends to do well in the short term but not well in the long term. Mm-hmm. And paradoxically, it's that very focus on performance that sabotages their long-term success. And we have a term we're introducing into the management lexicon called health, organizational health. And companies that focus equally on and manage with equal degrees of rigor their performance and their health at the same time tend to be those companies that do sustain, succeed, and thrive in the long term. Mm-hmm. Now, what do we mean by health? We can talk more about that later, but it's essentially, how well does an organization align its people, mobilize them to execute against the direction that's been set, and renew itself over time. So new ideas, innovative ideas, continuous improvement, etc. Those three aspects, alignment, execution, and renewal, are the elements of a healthy organization. So we've done the research we talked about before. We've understood organizational health, and we've been able to correlate that to a number of measures across multiple industries of performance and say, does this have a correlation to long-term performance? And we did 19 different measures, everything from EBITDA to growth in sales to enterprise book value to industry-specific measures. And in all cases, we found there is a correlation that if you're a healthy company, you're likely to be over the long term 2 times as high performing as a average company, average health company. But again, is it that you're high performing, therefore you look healthy, or is it you're healthy, therefore you're high performing? And that's where the causality question comes into play, which you can never get at through the analytics. And that's where we've had the luxury of time and the ability to work with multiple clients across industries to actually look at when we've approached the transformation of a company or the performance improvement of a company through the lens of performance and health versus just performance, what happens? And we've been able to do control studies where just as an example, you might take a group of bank branches that has a certain demographic group, it has a certain number of levels of footings and account balances, etc. You basically get 2 groups that look pretty similar. And you can do one in the more traditional approach to performance improvement and one with the balanced performance and health approach that we're advocating. And you can hold those pretty constant in terms of other programs, management changes, and look at those over time. And we found that, you end up with roughly twice the performance improvement that you would have otherwise when you take the performance and health approach as you look at it in the long term.
What were some of the specific companies or stories that you can share about the scenarios that you encountered in running some of these experiments?
We looked both in business banking and in retail banking. And we did exactly what I had mentioned in terms of those control groups. And what we found was the profit per business banker, when we went for a pretty traditional sales force effectiveness improvement program, there's an 8% improvement over 2 years. When we used the balanced performance and health approach, we found 19%. We came back 4 years later. We found the sustainability of impact was roughly twice what it was versus the other. We did similar things in coal mining, so big long wall coal mining. It was actually an Australian mine we did this with. Traditional approach, 15% improvement in tonnage. Performance and health approach, 25% improvement. Retailing, we looked at sales to labor ratios, 34% improvement versus, say, a 51% improvement with the balanced approach. Telcos, you name it. So we've done enough of these studies with enough companies in different industries that we feel quite confident that there is a causal relationship.
Right.
And, one vignette, I guess, that may be of interest to people, in about 2005, 2006, we had a team working on this topic within McKinsey. And that team, we asked them, could you just have a look at all the data available externally at some very famous companies and give us kind of a prediction of any companies that might have some health issues now that will surface in their performance later. Let's just see what you come up with. And again, we didn't have privileged access to the companies we were looking for at the time. We wanted to keep it just an external search. Fascinatingly, our team came back and they said, Toyota is a company that we're looking at their growth aspirations versus how they're ramping up given their capabilities and the mindsets required to run their system. And they're expanding at such a rate overseas that their quality engineers and their ability to onboard them in a way that they actually deliver against the Toyota way is going to be in jeopardy. So we think that around, in 5 or so years' time, you're going to see a bunch of quality issues. And to be honest, everyone laughed at that recommendation because at the time Toyota was at the top of their game. It's like, come on, they're like, the superstar. Everyone's learning from them on lean. And it was fascinating to call on the night. In 2010, there are senior leaders in Toyota testifying to Congress about their quality issues. And while that's just an anecdote, obviously, again, it's indicative of how health is a leading indicator of performance.
So you mentioned in the book a recipe for organizational success, organizational health, that you call the 5A approach, which stands for aspire, assess, architect, act, and advance. And the core ideas in here remind me of Drucker's idea of the theory of the business, where he said that when an enterprise fails, it's often because the assumptions on which an organization has been built and is being run no longer fit reality. Does this idea resonate for you?
Absolutely. And that, I think that idea is just timeless and absolutely right. And what we've tried to do with ideas like that is give leaders some really practical tools to use to be able to put the idea into practice in their organization to make it really tangible and manageable. And so you mentioned the 5A approach. It's probably worth just sharing with the audience. It's one thing to say, look, performance and health should be managed with the same amount of rigor and discipline as each other, and that there's a proven link and causal link between that and long-term sustainable performance. Another thing, and a more important question, is, well, how does a leader actually do that?
Right.
And so that's where this 5A's comes in.
Yes.
And in the 5A's, really, there's no magic in those 5 steps or stages as they are. The first one is, where do you want to go? What is your aspiration? So aspire being the first A. The second is the change readiness question is, well, what's your skill and will to go there? What's your, how ready are you to go there? You need to know that before you start the journey. So that's the assess is what we call that, the second A. Then once you know that, it's sort of, how do you go from A to B? What are you actually going to do to get there? And we call that architect is our third A, because you're architecting a program of activity to get there. The fourth A is the act stage of the program, which is you're actually on the journey. So how do you manage that journey? How do you keep energy up? How do you adjust as you go? Because the world's not standing still. And then the fifth A we call advance, which is how do you transition from kind of a state of transformational change to a state of continuous improvement. And that's, how do we keep moving forward, or again, we call it advance. So that's the fifth A. And to your point about, Drucker's thinking, we have tried to bring the same degree of rigor to the health side of each of those questions as the performance side, which most managers are familiar with. And one of the most important pieces of that equation is, first of all, do you have clear goals for the health of your organization? Do you have the right recipe for health that you're working on? And when you ask a senior leader, what are your performance objectives, you get an answer that's clear, and you get the same clarity of thinking and answer and use of vocabulary when you ask about their health targets. But more importantly is then, do you understand the structures of thinking or the mindsets the organization has that are what they, why they did what they did before, that need to shift to fit with the new performance aspiration and the new reality in terms of where you're headed. And I think that the specific tools related to that step are exactly, that's essentially the Drucker step we're talking about when you ask the question.
Scott, in the book you mentioned the work of A.G. Lafley, the former CEO of Procter & Gamble, and how he was committed to abandoning things that no longer worked. Lafley himself was actually a frequent visitor to Claremont, where he consulted with Peter Drucker. And we know that many visitors like A.G. Lafley and Rick Warren were frequently met with Drucker's question of, don't tell me what you've been doing, tell me what you stopped doing. What do you think about this whole idea, this notion of planned abandonment? Yep,
like that's exactly right. I mean, many organizations who are wired for mediocrity, so to speak, they don't have that clarity of direction. They don't have the absolute clarity on these are the critical few capabilities and mindset shifts that we need to make to get there. And therefore, their slate of initiatives is overloaded with a whole lot of stuff. And not only that, being done in a whole lot of different ways where it's not clear that the desired mindset shifts are being incorporated into the work itself, which is the best way to shift a mindset is to actually do the work you're doing in a different way, not to do a bunch of new things from HR, for example. Mm-hmm. So, I think that was key for P&G, and it's probably key for many organizations out there to get really clear on what is the portfolio of initiatives that will really make the biggest difference. And the second question we'd ask is that a balanced portfolio of initiatives, meaning it's balanced among things that will deliver in the short term, things that will deliver in the medium term, and things that will deliver in the long term. So the risk axis is as important as, the timing axis is as important as the size of what you're doing.
Right.
And
Drucker talked about this fine balance between long and short-term focus. He once wrote that the most critical management job is to balance short-term and long-term. And he went on to say that one-sided emphasis on the former is deleterious and dangerous. And deciding whether a business should be run for short-term results or with a focus on the long-term is a question of values. Financial analysts believe that businesses can be run for both simultaneously, but successful business people know better. So, Scott, your findings seem to diverge a little bit with Drucker here. You do think that it's possible to manage for both, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone struggles with that fine balance, in particular CEOs who are faced with all the market and analyst pressures for the short term that they are looked upon for. What we've found as we've introduced the performance and health thinking to senior leaders is there's both a sigh of relief, which is interesting. So here I can see a really practical way that I can be investing in my long-term performance by simultaneously working on my short-term performance and the health of my organization, today, such that tomorrow I'm in good shape for what I'll need to do then. There's kind of a sigh of relief that says, I see more practically now and more clearly how I can get the and, so to speak. There's also a little bit of anxiety, which is, it means I need to do some things differently. Because the evidence is just so clear in terms of how the dynamics work between performance and health. And, the recipe book is also quite clear in terms of what you need to do, but it does require someone to step out of their comfort zone and say, well, I'm going to go ahead and cook up a new recipe, and that's not easy for people.
So Drucker also writes about this idea, the danger of safe mediocrity. And I think you've also suggested that staying in one's comfort zone for too long ultimately leads to obsolescence or demise. What do you think about that idea?
Yeah, I think that's totally right. One way we talk about that with leaders is, if you ask someone, hey, how does it feel to be in your comfort zone? They'll say like, oh, it feels comfortable. It feels, I feel like I have mastery of things in there. It feels relaxed. It feels good. It feels certain. You ask them how it feels to be out of their comfort zone, and most people's first words are like, oh, fear, stress, panic, anxiety, those sorts of words. Of course, there are some words like exhilaration and excitement that come into play, but then you ask people, what happens if you leave your comfort zone and you stay out of your comfort zone for a little while? And people, kind of think about it and they say, well, my comfort zone expands. And what's just happened in that step? Mm-hmm. What have you done as an adult? You've just learned. You've just become more comfortable with a lot more stuff.
Right.
And so actually being out of the comfort zone is the learning zone, is the way we look at it. And, I think management as a whole is continuously learning. We're hoping we've pushed the frontier. But there's going to be a whole critical mass of managers who are going to say, I'm going to step out of my comfort zone in leadership into this new zone. But I'm hopeful in 10 years this is just sort of old news, performance and health. It's like the 7S framework. Just is, right?
So what are some of the responses to the book? Have there been any great surprises to you, and just how are people reacting to it?
Yeah, so far it's been fantastic, and we're obviously very pleased with that. The surprise, what the praise has been, hey, it's a big idea, it is new, and it's extremely practical. And the book is laden with lots of examples from all around the world, lots of real leaders. And so people appreciate kind of the breadth as well as the depth in it. We have received some bit of surprise from people saying, oh, McKinsey and Company, interesting. This all feels like an emphasis on getting the soft stuff as right as the hard stuff. And, we get that you would bring a lot of rigor to that, but you're not traditionally known in that space. You're more of a strategy consulting firm. And, our take on that is that good, we're glad you're getting in the learning zone in relation to that, because we as a firm, I think, have a very clear appreciation that it is managing both the hard and the soft sides with a level of rigor and certainty that is going to make the difference for leaders in the future to beat the odds of sustaining in the long term.
Thank you again so much, Scott. We really appreciate you making time for Drucker on the Dial. We wish you the very best with this book and look forward to hearing more from you again soon.
Okay. Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
Take care.
Drucker on the Dial is brought to you by the Drucker for Future Leaders program, an initiative of the Drucker Institute at Claremont Graduate University. The Drucker for Future Leaders program teaches management skills to middle and high school students who use the lessons they've learned to design and implement a community service project. The students then apply the same insights to develop a self-management plan to help them achieve their long-term academic and life goals. To find out more about the Drucker for Future Leaders program, please visit www.druckerinstitute.com and click on the Drucker in High Schools tab. Thank you for tuning in to Drucker on the Dial. As always, you can follow our ongoing conversation about leadership and management at our daily blog, The Drucker Exchange, at thedx.org, thedx.org.